What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the OTK podcast. This is Caleb, your host, and I am super excited about our guest. Since it is an even-numbered episode, that means we're talking about something having to do with faith or church culture. And so I'm going to let my guest introduce himself today because his last name is fancy in French, I assume. We'll find out where this last name comes from. But go ahead, tell the people who you are.
Yeah, my name is Jake Fouquier. It is French. It's from my parents are from Louisiana originally, so it's Cajun. You know, the crazy Cajuns down there. So it's Fouquier.
So what's the worst butchering of the name?
I'm not sure if it'd be appropriate.
Okay, how about second? What's the most common? Because I'm assuming most people don't have the guts to say the worst version to you. How do most people say your last name?
Fouquier or something like that.
That sounds even fancier. Like you should have a top hat and a monocle when you say that kind of last name. So we are here talking about youth ministry and culture as a whole, as far as how it pertains to this younger generation and all these kinds of things. So just tell the audience a little bit about what it is you do and why you have kind of a unique perspective on this topic.
Yeah, I'm a youth pastor and a young adult pastor in Orange County, California. And what's interesting about Orange County is the different dynamics that you have within the whole county. So North County is very eclectic. It's very sort of like racially diverse, and then South County is very wealthy and pretty much one or two races, and so it's just an interesting mesh of people. And so what we do on Saturday night is we send a lot of vans out into the community picking kids up. And what I love about our youth ministry is such a great mixture of all of those different things, and it's such a great representation of what I think the church should be a representation of in Orange County. And so we really get a blessing of doing that on a Saturday night. So it's an interesting night. It's a different night than doing a youth ministry, but we love it, and it's been going quite well. And
you guys have had a lot of success. What does an average night look like as far as attendance?
Average, we would run between 175 to 200 on a week, and a big event anywhere between 250 to 400, depending on what event it is.
So what are some of the unique challenges? I mean, because you're talking about a youth group the size of most normal congregations. I mean, so what are, to somebody that isn't familiar with kind of that mega church mindset, what are the challenges that you have that a lot of other people wouldn't?
Yeah, and I think the personal discipleship aspect is always going to be your biggest challenge, because in youth ministry, and especially for really what my heart is, and I know our pastor's heart is, it's not just to gather a crowd, that's almost the easiest thing to do when you get to a church, that's a bigger size. Yeah. But it's how do you develop a person into becoming who God's called them to be, and that's really our biggest challenge, and that just always boils down to leadership. You've got to have great leaders that you trust, because in a crowd that size, I can't micromanage, and I can't have the personal conversations that I would want with each kid, and have those opportunities to pray with maybe every single kid. But if we empower our leaders correctly, that's where. So it takes a lot of trust on my end, which is always a scary thing, sometimes. But that's what leadership is, and it requires of a lot of people,
That makes sense. So before the camera started rolling, we were talking about your youth ministry, and you'd mentioned that you had a very multi-ethnic group. What are some of your perspectives? Because I think it's a weird place that the church is in general, as far as it seems like, maybe some of the more liberal groups like to talk about nothing but race. Some of the conservative groups like to talk about, like, just avoid it, like it's the black plague. Like, we're not going to acknowledge that race exists, whatever. But when you're doing ministry with a group that has all of these different cultural backgrounds and different mindsets, what are some of the things that you think are important if you could talk to church leaders on this issue of reaching out to people that don't look like the pastor? Usually you look at a congregation, it'll mirror whoever is on staff. How do you get over that? What are some of the things that people need to know about doing ministry that way?
Well, I think we're blessed to be a part of a church that is very, very diverse. And that's one thing that Free Chapel is so well. Our pastor Jensen Franklin, just carries that anointing with him. So I think part of it just comes from us. And I think the number one thing we need to address is that there is an issue. Yeah. I think, like you said, we don't need to focus on only the issue. Right. We need to focus on the solution, but we need to address that there is an issue. Right. Because if young people are feeling as if the church is not addressing an issue that makes them feel like they don't matter, then why
Right.
would they come to the church? And so I think oftentimes when we hide away from these racial and and social issues, we're actually doing something that Jesus never did. The thing that's interesting about Jesus, one of the number one things he talked about was racism and social justice and these different things. And so
Right.
he would come into a room and he would address the issue, but he never focused on it. It wasn't the only thing. He didn't leave it at just addressing the issue, which sometimes we do.
Yeah.
But he always brought the solution. And so I think oftentimes we have to address that there's an issue, and we have to address, and how we address that is by preaching Jesus, bringing love, and creating a community that mirrors the community that Jesus wanted to be birthed, which is diverse, which is multi-ethnic, which is a mosaic of different colors and backgrounds and people. And when we have that community, it becomes a representation to the world. Wow, we can make this work.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the church is almost sometimes more divided on these issues than the world, and then we wonder why no one wants to come to our churches and communities and be
Yeah.
a part of it, because we say we have the solution, but our congregations don't represent that.
Yeah.
And in Acts chapter 2, it says that they had favor with people, then God added to their numbers daily. And I think what's interesting is that we always focus on God adding to our numbers daily, but we don't ever stop to think, how do we gain favor with people?
Yeah.
And that's showing them that our community is a desirable place to be in. And in Acts chapter 2, they say they gather in the temple, then they go house to house and they break bread. And theologians believe when they would go house to house, it was people going to the common language that they would speak. And so what that shows you is that the first congregation was multi-ethnic,
Yeah.
was diverse, and was this amazing tapestry of different people. And that's what drew people there, as they gained favor and realizing, man, all these barriers we have out here don't exist in the church. I need to be a part of that. So I think that we need to address that there's an issue. And we don't need to overthink it. We don't need to overpreach it. We don't, our messages shouldn't be centered around a political issue ever, no matter
Right.
what issue it is. And the church has been caught up in that. Our messages need to be centered around Jesus and the unity that he brings. But we do need to address, man, people are feeling this way in our congregation, because then they feel, oh, wow, they understand me.
That's really good. So you mentioned, and when we did our interview with Pastor Grant and Chandler, I asked them, and it was fascinating to watch, because you pose a question, and then it almost seems like the idea just becomes this rabbit hole, of where is this balance? So I'll pose the same one to you. The issue of social justice. It's fascinating to me how take the Democratic Party. They have some key leaders within their movements that are pastors, Louis Farrakhan and Reverend Al Sharpton. And I mean, some of the big people are pastors. Some of the most vocal, outspoken supporters of everything they do are these pastors. And you see oftentimes the young people that identify with faith are also the ones that over-identify with those kind of ideas that those people are preaching. So my question to you is, what role should, because I think most conservative Christians would agree that they overstep what is healthy in that area, but what role does social activism play in bringing in young people? Because this generation is more active in this area than any other generation in history. So do you risk the over-politicization, I'm going to say that right, to over-politicize the church if you go too far in that other direction? Or if you don't do it at all, are you risking missing out on a generation that thinks that if a church really cares about a community, they have to be on the front lines of every single issue, fighting about every single thing? Where do you draw that kind of balance in that line?
Well, I think the tension that Jesus drew, and it says in the Bible, is the fullness of grace and truth. So I think oftentimes in the church, we are so either or. Like, oh, I'm either a Republican and I'm against abortion and I'm against gay marriage and I'm
Right.
for Israel, but then our social issues we don't address because that's not a part of the Republican Party.
Right.
Or we're so social issues, but then we forget about some really strong biblical standards that God has set, maybe like marriage and the power and the value of everyone's life, whether it's someone who's living or is just before they're born.
Right.
And so we need to find tension. Like, we cannot build our theology off political ideas, and that's where we go wrong. So I think with a youth ministry, it should be a safe haven. You should be able to address anything and everything with the Bible and not be afraid about it, right? So we could address social issues, and we can address abortion. We can address anything, not that we would address necessarily abortion, particularly in a youth ministry, but we could, because biblically we have grounds to address each one. And it shouldn't be about policies or politics. It should be about the gospel, and it should become a safe haven where, outside of the church, it's always divisive, right? It's either you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, or it's either you stand for the flag or you're a racist.
You hate America.
Yeah, you hate America, or you're a racist, right?
Yeah.
There's for some reason you can't do both, right? You can't honor your country and stand for police brutality and social justice for people feeling marginalized and pushed down. So the church should be the place of balance, right? But because we politicize things, it becomes the polar opposite. It becomes a part of the problem instead of the solution. And what's interesting is that it says in the Bible, wherever there's division and strife, there's every demonic work. So what's interesting about politics is I think it creates that right there. It's just the enemy's plan to separate and divide each and every person. So I think with a young person is we can't be afraid to answer their questions, which oftentimes youth pastors are, because they don't want to drive them away. So whether it pertains to sexual purity, whether it pertains to social justice, abortion, gay marriage, whatever it may be, you can't be afraid to answer a question straightforward. A kid's not asking you a question to get a surface level answer that doesn't answer anything and just makes them question what you believe. You've got to stand for what you believe, answer the way the Bible would answer, but love on them as well. You can do both. Like, you can bring truth to someone and grace at the same time, because we serve a God that is the fullness of that. Yeah. So I think oftentimes we get like a little afraid to bring truth, a little like, it's like, you gotta
don't want to upset people. I don't want to offend people.
And Jesus wasn't that way, but Jesus always brought love to that, right? Yeah. And you see the biggest change, like the woman, who's caught in adultery. It was the greatest, picture of grace and truth, because he addresses her with grace and doesn't shame her, but then he tells her, don't go sin anymore. But the grace and the love that he showed her motivated her now to walk out her life. So when you're with youth, and you're with a teenager, and they're and they're doing stuff that isn't benefiting their life and isn't contributing to their walk with God, and they say, is this right? Don't play it safe. Be like, no, it's not right, but I love you, and I'm going to walk you through it. Let's do this. Come on. Yeah. And so I think the politicizing of things is where we really get into trouble. Yeah. Especially as the church, because then what you do is you force people to pick a side. And Jesus never picked a side except for his own. I think Pastor Jensen said this, and I loved it, because it says when Joshua was going up to Jericho, the angel showed up, and he took off his shoes, and he bowed before him and said, whose side are you on? Are you on my side? And the angel said, I'm on no one's side. I'm on God's side. Yeah, that's good. And Pastor Jensen said, God's not on anyone's side. He needs you to get on his. He needs you to get on his side. That's good. So now I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And so instead of us in the church saying, hey, whose side are you on? Are you on the Republican side or the Democratic side? Are you for abortion? Are you for, are you against social justice? No. Are we on God's side? God cares about people. Yeah. God cares about life. God cares about marriage. But I also think that he cares about someone who feels left out, who feels marginalized, ostracized, and undervalued. And we need to take heart in that. So we can do both. Like, we can promote, we can build good, godly, amazing marriages in our church and build families. And we can also help out those who are hurting, because that's what the church is for. So I think it's interesting when we get too political in the church.
No, that's good. So I want to do a little shift here. And we usually try to pull up something on Instagram. Usually it's something embarrassing. I was super disappointed to find out long ago you'd wiped anything embarrassing off of your Instagram. So for those watching at home, we're going to pull up a photo so they can see the picture that we're talking about. But for the picture that we picked to discuss a little bit, why don't you describe kind of what's happening in this picture, the story behind it, and why it's kind of a big deal to church nerds like me.
Yeah. So the picture's with my brother Jude and my oldest brother, and then Carl Lentz, and Pastor Carl Lentz, who's an amazing pastor from Hillsong, New York. We were in New York City for our middle brother's wedding, actually, and we were there for a couple weeks. And so we went to Hillsong, New York, as you do when you're a Christian and you're in New York. We went, and I had went to the morning service and was actually like super annoyed because I think I was like 19 at the time and was like, super temperamental. And so went to the morning service and I was annoyed because Carl didn't preach. And I was like, what the
yeah.
heck? Like, I didn't come
Came
all
all
this.
the way. Yeah.
And whoever preached did an amazing job. Nothing towards them. They're amazing.
Yeah.
So I was just hanging out. I was like, my brother Drew was like, oh, we're going to go to a night service. And I was like, I'm not going to go to 2 services to not hear Carl preach. And so I don't go to the night service, funny enough. And Pastor Carl just preached that night. So then my brother calls me, hey, bro, you need to come. Pastor Carl just invited us to his house. Like, you need to like come right now.
Dang. Yeah.
So I sprinted. I got on the subway as fast as I could, got back to the venue just in time, hopped in the car. And so we were able to go to Pastor Carl's house with his staff and some of the friends and just hang out after church. And it was really cool to see the community that they have out there and the leadership team they've built. And, you know, a lot of the favor that, you know, we may have isn't necessarily because we're just like these amazing people. We just have an amazing dad who people love and respect and honor. And so, and Pastor Carl really does honor people. And he's such a great man to me and my brother, such a great hero. And so it's just a cool moment. So, you know, why not post it? And that was cool, especially, you know.
Yeah, no,
so.
I see you are you're a better Christian than I am, because I would like do a Throwback Thursday and it would be my photo every single Throwback Thursday. People would get so tired of it because I looked at it and it only had like 100 likes, and your other photos later on had way more than that. I'm like, dude, he is a Christ-like individual, because I would have been like, Throwback Thursday, same photo every single time, you know, because that would have been so cool. But I think that's a great segue into our next topic of the issue of media as ministry. You know, that's exactly why I do what I do, is the fact that I see, you know, the average young person for middle school, high school, and into early adult spends nearly 9 hours a day consuming some form of media, whether it's TV, YouTube, social media, or whatever. And I've had a lot of conversations with people, and a lot of people act as if it's a sign of the end of the world, you know, as if somehow...
but doesn't the church make everything a sign of the end of the world?
Everything is like in Revelation. It says in chapter 2, you text too much, you know?
Yeah, totally.
And it's been interesting to me, the number of people, just their perspective is so different than mine, because I look at that and I say, so, you know, they look at it and they think, that's a sign that their relationships are disconnected. That's a sign that they've cheapened what faith is, because now instead of reading your Bible, you just like one of the Bible verses on your Instagram page or whatever. I look at that and I say, you mean to tell me that young people have decided they're going to give something their attention for 9 hours, something that I have the potential of being in that feed, you know what I mean? And it's been amazing to me how resistant some of the church has been, specifically to social media. And I get it, because there's a lot of negative consequences that comes from social media, but at the same time, when you think of, and this was the conversation that I had with a few people, is the fact that you have pastors that have a congregation of 5,000, 7,000, and then they have 50,000 followers. I mean, they have the opportunity to influence so many more than they would ever actually be able to shake the hand of. So in your position, you know, being able to meet some of these guys and run in circles of knowing and being around people that are kind of the main topic of conversation about this issue of the cult of celebrity and all the celebrity pastors. And it's a weird age, you know, when TMZ is like covering the relationship celebrities have with their pastors, you know that we're in uncharted territory. So What are your thoughts on, you know, the consequences of social media, but also the benefits of using it as a ministry tool? Why should people not be ignoring this phenomenon?
I think the consequences can be that you can make your ministry about that. Yeah. You know, like where it's just how many followers or likes you have, right? Which in some ways it's, why is that bad? You're having access. So it's like, it's kind of
influence
like,
on some
right,
level. Yeah.
It's influence on some level. But I think where I see is like young people now chase that. Yeah. So like, oh, cool. You know, Rich was hanging out with Justin Bieber, and now I want to be a pastor. But they have no idea what being a pastor actually means. It means that you have to sacrifice your life for people, because that's really what it is. It has nothing to do with the celebrity status. But I think what's cool is that God is using these men who have given their lives. You know, I'm looking at guys like Pastor Judah, who, you know, I've known my whole life, sacrifices his life, loves people with everything he's got. Yeah. Pastor Rich and Pastor Chad and Pastor Carl, all these guys love people, genuinely care about people, and honestly could care less how many followers they have, but that's why I feel like God's given them that influence. Even my own pastor, Pastor Jensen, who I think is probably the greatest person on earth, and is my absolute hero. is just the most humble and genuine man I've ever met in my life. And the way he operates in the spirit when he's off stage is just mind blowing. And so I see these guys and I see the influence they have, and I know it's for a reason.
Yeah.
Because I know that they're going to put a good face on Jesus to a lot of people who need it. And I think it's interesting. We like really, really, take these celebrities and hold them on this higher pedestal, and we forget they're just people.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes that it makes it difficult for them to love Jesus and, meet Jesus is because when they come to our communities, they're just treated, just as if they were like another celebrity, and everyone wants pictures and autographs. And I think that a lot of these guys who, a lot of these pastors have made them feel normal.
Yeah.
They've treated them as just normal, and they've opened up their homes to them. They've given of their time to them. They're probably paying for their lunch, not expecting them to pay for it.
Right.
And I think that's interesting because that's what Jesus does. He gives. He never goes into a relationship asking for something.
Yeah.
But because when, it says in Galatians, when you sow of the Spirit, you reap eternal life. You reap the blessings of eternal life. And I see these men, and it's just what they've sown, they're reaping. And so it's not a surprise. And so
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think it's so cool. I think social media and media is so cool because you can have access to, I look at these, YouTube for me was, I looked up stupid videos, right?
Cat videos.
And I just
videos.
laugh,
Yeah, I
right?
get it.
But now there's people who have millions of subscribers, and we as a church need to get on this. We need to do a better job of putting out good quality content that cultivates conversation in people's lives, right? Instagram is the same way. We can have thousands of people, like you said, look at our Instagram, and I think the church is starting to realize this, and we're putting out live stream and all that stuff, and putting up sermons on YouTube, and I'm starting to see other churches even putting up just content, not even just sermons, and that's awesome, and it's great to see because we are going to be able to access different people. And I think the only sign that it would ever be of the end times isn't because it's demonic, but because we have now access to probably every nation and every continent on the world with one click. Someone in Africa could be watching the sermons that are being preached here in California. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, whereas before the only way you reach Africa is if you flew there and, spent
a crusade.
Exactly.
But
thing. Now it's different, and it's crazy. So I think it's such a beautiful tool. Yeah. And if you, my wife always makes fun of me. She's like, "You're terrible at Instagram." I'm not the best at making mine look aesthetically great or whatever, but I think it is a tool that every person should be aware of. It should be, using it frequently to connect with people. I think where pastors can get really in trouble though is if, for myself included, I've always found myself sometimes looking at Instagram and seeing, man, that was a great night for them. You're always seeing the highlights, right? You never see the
weaknesses.
And I just love, there's some pastors I follow and some people I follow that they post weak moments, and I'm and it's everyone's surprised by it. Yeah. And I'm that's dope.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I need to be more secure. Help me, Lord.
Yeah. So
I think that's probably the detriment, is that you're always comparing, and you can find yourself going down a rabbit hole. Man, I wish, or always trying to, network, market, or whatever. But I think those are minimal to the pros of media and social media. Is just the access. It's just insane.
Well, I've always thought it was interesting. One thing that stuck out to me is I'll run ads on a Christian meme page or something, just trying to get the word out about what we're doing and that kind of stuff. And, I have this ad where I talk about, I say, young people are spending 9 hours a day. What about if instead of complaining about the fact that kids are looking at their phones, we give them something good to look at, kind of thing, and use I think the tagline I used was put the morals back in media. And I was amazed at the number of Christians that commented. It was you're 4 years behind. We're already doing that, all of this stuff. And usually what I comment back is, give me one Christian YouTuber that gets 1/10 the number of views of even the 50th YouTuber in the secular world. The number of people that are oh, well, churches live stream or churches are on Instagram. What more do you want? And it seems to me that even young Christians, I wouldn't say middle school or high school, I would say guys in their 20s and 30s, seem to almost feel as if like, oh, if we're on the platform, it doesn't matter how well we're performing or who we're reaching or any of these things. It's kind of like well, the fact that we're not absolutely terrible at what we're doing is good enough. And I can't understand that mindset of, you should want to do everything you can to the best of your ability and dominate in whether it's sports.
Yeah.
You look at the Tim Tebow's and the Steph Curry's and the, of the sports world. You look at acting, people like Chris Pratt. It's like when you're really good at your craft, people pay attention.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm curious your thoughts on like, why do you think Christians are so willing to settle when a lot of those same people aren't old? I would expect that from somebody in their 60s, right? But there's a lot of young people that seem to give me pushback of like, oh, well, what more do you want? We're putting out Christian movies. I'm like, well, name a Christian movie any non-Christian wants to see. But that's just the reality of it. People seem to be completely content on where things are in Christian media. And that seems so odd considering the expectation that a young person has when they flip on a Netflix show. Their expectation is through the roof. They turn on a Christian movie and they're like...
So low.
Low.
I think it's because we live in a bubble. Like, I think when you become a Christian, you get into this like bubble, like this world that seems really big, and like we have our own Christian celebrities and we have all these different things, and so to us it's like, oh, we are reaching a lot of people. We're reaching a lot of church people. And I think that's the mindset change that has to happen. We're not here to reach a bunch of church people. I'm so glad that you love me, I'm so glad you love the church and love people, and that's awesome. You should. But our focus in our media shouldn't just be to promote our church to get transplant growth. Right? So to get someone from the church from across town to come to our church because our social media is better, because that's kind of what happens, right?
For sure.
Or come to our conference because we have a big speaker and you saw it on social media. which amazing. Let's go hear these speakers. But it's all of your approach and your mindset and your goal. So what's your goal? So I think if our goal is to reach church people, then 100% we're doing a great job. Doing a great job. We've reached a lot of church people, and a lot of church people check out our social media. But if you want to reach someone who doesn't know God, then we've got to put some work into it, and it's got to be quality content. And I think for me as a youth pastor, we're looking into doing a YouTube page, and I'm like, okay, I want to do it, but if we're going to do it,
we do it well.
We do it well. I want the best content. I don't want it to just be me preaching or to be, just these Bible clips. Those, we'll have those and it'll be good. But look, how do we do funny content? How do we do like this vlog where a kid, because I watch some of the vlogs that they watch. It's not like it's like
crazy production value.
No, and it doesn't like benefit their life. It's just people going crazy. And I'm like, I could do that. Right. But it does take work. It does take, planning. And I think oftentimes the church, we are reactionary, right, in anything we do. So the world starts doing something, so we react, oh, we got to do that, but we don't do it right. We do it to the quality that reaches people in church, but we don't do it to that would hold up in Hollywood or hold up on a YouTube standard, because it's reactionary. Instead of tapping into the Holy Spirit, crazy concept, the creator of heaven and earth, the most creative person that's ever, creative being, which is God, say, hey, God, give me perspective, give me insight, show me how to do this correctly. And we do it well. We do it with excellence. We do it with, where we're trying to show people that God is not, cheesy. God is not going to shortchange you. You're not missing out on things when you go to God. And I think the church should be the greatest place for people to be developed and growing in their creative gifts, whether it's music,
for sure,
multimedia, all these different things, marketing, social media. So I think the problem is, to answer your question, is that young people have the wrong goal. We always we church hop a lot. So if you find those 20s and 30s, they're always going to the coolest church event.
Right.
And so the reason why they think we're doing good with social media is because they're really connected in the church social media world, where the next event is and where the next speaker's at and where the next conference is at, rather than stopping and asking, is it actually reaching a non-Christian? And that's our goal. And so we've kind of lost the goal. We rather gather a crowd and feel good about ourselves, pat ourselves on the back, than do some dirty work and go reach someone who's never talked about, heard about Jesus or wants to hear about Jesus, and say, hey, I love you, hear you, and giving them content that's actually going to spark a conversation on the inside of them and saying, maybe I'm missing something.
That's super good.
And so that's what I think. I think it's just perspective, and I think it's the end goal. we put on it in the church.
That's super good. Okay, one last question, and then we'll wrap up. I guess it's a two-part one question. Give me one thing that you're really excited about that you see coming, whether it's not just within the four walls of the church, but Christian music or Christian movies or whatever, anything having to do with the culture of faith. What one thing you're excited about, and one thing that you're a little hesitant about that maybe puts you back on your toes, and you think we need to be careful about how we go about this.
I think, man, that's a loaded question. I think what I'm excited about is that we have a young generation who does think differently. Growing up in church and going to, probably a pretty heavily Pentecostal church when I was younger, it's just different. And it was, I think for that time was great, but I think it is good to think differently, and to begin to create media that's, beautiful, to reach people that never could be reached. And I see that we're in that direction as a church, and that's pretty awesome. I think a couple things that I'm afraid of, not afraid of, I should never say that because it's not a spirit of fear, but things I get leery of is a spirit of entitlement in the church. I think a lot of young people don't, I think when they want to do ministry, like I said, it becomes more about becoming a celebrity and not doing the work of just reaching people.
Or sweeping floors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they feel, I need to be here. I need to be preaching. I need to do this. But they're not actually planted in a house. Right. And doing, and I think the church as a whole being unified. And I'm seeing that's actually a good thing. I see that we're growing in unity as a church. It's not like individual churches doing their own thing. I'm starting to see churches and take over communities together, which is what God wanted. But I think with young people, we got to be planted in one church. We can't be jumping from church to church to church and not have any accountability or growth as in maturity. And I think some different things like that. I see some concerns in the sense of, I think we are over politicizing some things in the church both ways. Right. And I think politics and church don't necessarily go together. I think that, we've got to preach Jesus, and we've got to preach the gospel, and we've got to be able to remove our personal opinion politically from that. Yeah. And young people have got to do the same thing, because what's going on is some have over politicized it one way to where it pushes young people away, but then I think young people over politicize it in the sense of they are so swept up in culture. And culture cannot define your theology. Right. And that's what I'm starting to see happen. So when it comes to sexuality, culture is defining what our theology is and what we believe on sexuality, not the Bible. And we're too afraid to address it because we're going to be called a bigot, or we're too afraid to address it because we're going to be called someone who's against the grain. But throughout the Bible, that's everyone, right? Anybody that God used, it's like they had to fight against culture. So where I'm leery is that we have biblically illiterate Christians in the younger generation who don't know their word, who don't know what God believes. And so as a youth pastor, that's my goal. My goal is not to preach an amazing sermon. How do I make a conducive environment to help a young person grow in maturity? And I believe maturity is when you hear the voice of God, how fast do you obey? Right. Good. And so we have a lot of young people hearing the voice of God saying, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. But they're not obeying because it doesn't fit in with what culture says. And I think it's interesting that that culture has become the biggest definer of our theology in every church, in every and some, and not in every church, but in a lot of churches it's happening where now, we've put the picture of grace and acceptance, and we've denied truth. Yeah. But grace and acceptance are awesome and are totally needed. But what's the next step? When someone receives that grace and gets saved, that grace now needs to empower them to some truth and push them to now grow as a person and become the best version of themselves, which is the God version of themselves, and grow in maturity. And even Paul says that to the Corinthian church, I want to give you meat, I want to give you substance, but you're not mature enough. You can only handle milk. Yeah. And it wasn't that they weren't saved. It wasn't that they didn't receive grace. It's just that they were okay with where they're at. And I think we're okay with a lot of things, but I think the church is growing, and it's better than it's ever been. And we are a part of a generation that can reach more people than anyone ever.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
That is so exciting, whether it's through social media, whether it's through our Sunday gatherings or our church gatherings. We can reach people at a exponential rate. And I'm excited to be a part of that. I'm excited I get to be just a small piece in the puzzle and be under people like Pastor Jensen and be around people that I've seen and just be able to observe. I think that's something that God really challenged me, is be an observer, learn. I think too many young people think they know everything, 20s and 30s especially. Oh yeah, I know that. Well, man, we've got people who've done things that we could never dream of.
Yeah.
Right? Like preach in front of crowds that we can't fathom. Let's stop and see, what are they doing that I need to do?
For sure.
Like I look at a man like Pastor Jensen, the way he holds up his standards and character in a culture that it's almost become really easy to slide on.
Yeah.
I need to do that. And because there's reasons why he's so anointed and so powerful, and it's because of who he is. And a lot of these guys, Pastor Judah Smith, same way, just who he is as a person. It's like, Pastor Ben, our campus pastor here, who he is as a person. I see that and I'm like, okay, no wonder he's so anointed. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I want to do that. I want to be that, and so, but we've got a lot of hope. It's crazy, man. We get to be a part of the greatest thing ever, which is the local church.
Absolutely.
Like, it's amazing.
Well, thanks, man. I greatly appreciate you being on. Before we go, tell everybody where they can find you on your social media tags or anything they want to follow what you got going on.
Yeah. You can follow me on Instagram at Jake Fouquier, which is Fouquier. You could also check out our youth ministry page, which is at Free Chapel Youth. So check it out. Give me a follow. If you have any other questions, I'd love to answer them and connect with you. So.
Awesome. Well, anything you want to follow of ours, it's all at OTK Media on all of our platforms. If you want to support what we're trying to do here, it's patreon.com/OTK Media. Until next time, we love you very much. Bye-bye.